The wind always carried secrets across the wide plains, but that morning it felt heavier, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The old ranch stretched far into the rough countryside, its fences worn, its fields quiet, and the distant mountains standing like silent watchers. The world seemed calm on the surface, yet something felt ready to shift, like the slow rumble before a storm. That was the feeling she noticed as soon as she stepped down from the small wagon and looked across the open land she would soon call home. The frontier air carried the smell of dust, wood smoke, and something else she couldn't quite name, something that made her heart beat a little faster. She had come a long way to this remote ranch, believing she would find a fresh start far from the trouble she left behind. Life in the old towns had turned sharper for her, and the quiet promise of the American frontier offered a kind of hope she had been chasing for months. She wanted peace, a place where no one whispered about her past, a place where the wide sky gave room for her thoughts to settle. But the moment she arrived, she sensed that the ranch was not as simple as she imagined. The land felt alive, as if every hill and shadow held stories waiting to be uncovered. The rancher stood near the porch, leaning slightly on the rail as if he had been watching her since the wagon rolled in. He was calm, steady, and carried himself like a man who had lived with both hardship and patience. His voice was low, and even when he spoke, the kind that made a person trust him even before they meant to. He looked like someone shaped by the land itself, with the quiet strength of a man who had mended fences, dealt with cattle, and faced the lonely nights of the frontier more times than he could count. He wasn't much of a talker, but the ranch didn't need many words. It needed hands that could work, eyes that could notice danger, and people who could endure Dot as she walked toward him, her boots sinking slightly into the dusty ground. She felt a mix of nervousness and curiosity. She wondered what kind of life waited for her out here. The rancher watched her closely, not in a troubling way, but as if he was trying to understand what she carried inside her. She felt exposed for a moment, as if he could see more than she wanted to reveal, but then he gave a small nod, one that felt like a welcome. The ranch house behind him showed signs of repair. One side had new planks, the roof looked patched, and a fresh stack of chopped wood leaned against the wall. It wasn't a grand home, but it had a warmth to it, a place that looked lived in, steadied by someone who cared enough to keep it standing through storms. Beyond the house stretched fields and barns, and further out, a cluster of rocky formations rising like old bones of the land. She couldn't help but feel a strange pull toward the place, both inviting and unsettling. He helped her with her bags and led her inside. The house smelled faintly of pine and the smoke from the morning fire. It was simple, but everything had a purpose. The chairs were sturdy, the shelves handmade, and the floorboards carried the marks of years of work boots and long days. She felt a sense of grounding there, as if the house itself held the history of every person who had passed through. Yet, even in that quiet, she sensed something hidden, something the rancher wasn't saying. He finally spoke again after a long silence. He told her the ranch had been through a rough season, that cattle had been restless, that the nights had grown strange. He didn't say much more, and she didn't want to push him, but she could tell he was carrying worries heavier than the land itself. She had expected a peaceful job and a simple routine, yet every word he spoke hinted at something different, something bigger than chores or fences. As the day went on, she helped around the house and walked the edge of the property, trying to understand the rhythm of the ranch. She noticed broken branches in odd places, soil disturbed as if something large had moved through the area, and cattle tracks that looked uneven. But she brushed it off, thinking maybe the frontier was full of things she was not used to seeing. The rancher watched her from time to time, making sure she didn't wander too far. He wasn't controlling, just cautious, as if he knew the land better than anyone and understood the dangers she couldn't see yet. By evening, the sky turned orange and gold, and a quiet settled over the fields. She sat on the small bench near the porch, taking in the scenery. She felt tired, but calm, believing she would get used to this place sooner than expected. The rancher joined her a moment later, standing near the wooden post while the last light of the day faded. He didn't say much, but his silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the kind of quiet shared by people who understood the land. Then something happened that shifted the entire air around them. A faint sound came from the direction of the barn, low and steady. She turned her head, trying to understand what it was. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't an animal she recognized. It carried weight like something hidden beneath wood or earth. Her chest tightened, though she didn't know why. Before she could stand, the rancher stepped closer, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. Too big. "Just sit tight," he said calmly. His voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. Yet the seriousness in it froze her in place. She felt a chill race through her, even though the air was warm. She stared at him, trying to read his expression, but his face stayed calm, almost too calm. That calmness made her uneasy because it felt practiced. Like he had used that tone many times before. She didn't know what he meant until she felt something under the bench shift. At first it was slight, like a faint tremor beneath her. She held her breath. Then the wood moved again, firmer this time. She felt the board beneath her rise just a little, as if something was pushing from underneath. Her hands tightened around the edge of the bench. She looked at the rancher, her eyes widening, but he kept his hand on her shoulder, steady but tense. "Don't move," he murmured. Her heartbeat pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. The ground gave another small lift, enough to break her breath into a sharp gasp. She tried to stand, but his hand pressed her down gently, telling her without words that standing might be a mistake. Whatever was under her wasn't small. It wasn't harmless. And it wasn't just passing through. She felt the bench tilt again. And this time she knew for certain something was directly beneath her. The rancher stepped back slowly, eyes fixed on the ground. She followed his gaze down to the dirt under the wooden slats. Something moved there. And the shape was growing. Her mouth went dry. The rancher whispered one more sentence, even quieter than before. His voice filled with a tension she had not heard earlier. "It's waking." And before she could ask him what that meant, the bench gave a long, slow creak as something enormous pressed upward from the shadows below. The bench creaked again, long and slow, as if something huge was pushing upward with careful strength. She felt the wood shift beneath her, and her breath caught in her throat. The rancher's calm expression had changed, not into fear, but into the look of a man who had been expecting this moment for much longer than he wanted to admit. She could see the tension in his shoulders as he stepped back, watching the ground with an intensity that raised the hairs on her arms. She wanted to stand, run, or even shout, anything to break the strange stillness around them. But something in his voice held her frozen more than his hand ever could. The air felt heavier, as if the entire ranch was holding its breath. The low rumble under the bench stopped for a moment, then shifted slightly to the right. She felt the wood settle under her, but not completely. It was as if the thing beneath her was listening, waiting, understanding the steps around it. She finally whispered, asking what was going on. But her voice felt too small compared to the vast quiet of the frontier evening. He didn't answer her right away. He kept his eyes down, scanning the ground like a man reading signs only he understood. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, almost too steady for what was happening. "It's been moving closer these past few weeks," he said. "I thought it would avoid the house tonight." She didn't know what he meant, but the way he said it made her think this was not the first time. The ranch looked normal from the outside. Quiet fields, worn fences, cattle wandering near the edge of the property. Nothing showed signs of anything strange, yet the land seemed to know more than it revealed. She felt as if she had stepped into a chapter of life the rancher had been living alone for a long time, a chapter he tried to keep hidden. The bench trembled again. A tiny puff of dry soil lifted through the gaps between the wood planks, floating upward like a warning. She drew her legs back, trying to make herself lighter on the bench. Every muscle in her body tightened. The rancher lifted one hand slightly, signaling her to stay seated. His eyes were sharp now, tracking each movement below as if a small mistake could turn dangerous. She asked him what was under her, but he only shook his head slowly, his jaw tightening. "Not now," he said. "Just breathe. It won't strike unless we startle it." The word strike made her chest tighten. She had grown up around barns and fields, but nothing about this situation felt familiar. She didn't know if it was an animal or something else entirely. The land had many secrets. People always said the old American frontier carried more than dust and cattle. Some folks believed the ground held old stories, long-forgotten things, or creatures that appeared only when the land felt threatened. But she never believed any of that until now. The ground shifted again, and she felt the movement travel up through the bench. It was slow, intentional, like the creature was studying her presence. The rancher finally moved a step closer, but he didn't reach for her. Instead, he kept his hand near the holster at his hip. She noticed he wasn't touching it to draw the weapon. He was touching it like someone who planned never to use it unless forced. Her breath felt shaky as she tried to understand what kind of life this rancher had been living. The calm, steady attitude he had shown earlier was not just part of his personality. It was something survival had carved into him. The movement under the bench weakened, then shifted away, dragging a subtle line in the dirt. The bench settled back into place, but she didn't dare move. Her legs were stiff and her heart kept pounding. She looked at him, silently asking if she could stand now. After a long moment, he gave a small nod. She rose slowly, stepping back as lightly as she could. The rancher guided her away from the bench, keeping his eyes on the ground until they were several steps from the disturbed soil. Only then did he breathe deeper, shoulders loosening by an inch. The tension didn't disappear, but it thinned enough for her to feel air reach her lungs again. He led her to the porch steps, motioning for her to sit. She sank down, trying to steady her hands. The rancher stood beside her, looking out across the open field, where the darkness was starting to swallow the horizon. The cattle moved restlessly in the distance, making low sounds that echoed across the quiet land. Even they seemed uneasy. She asked him again what it was. He didn't answer. Instead, he talked about the ranch, though not in the way she expected. He told her the land had always been different from neighboring areas. Old families who had lived here before him often left early, claiming the soil wasn't fertile or the land was cursed in small ways that kept them from settling. Most people never spoke clearly about what they saw or heard. They only said the ground sometimes moved when it shouldn't. He explained that when he first bought the ranch, he didn't believe any of it. He worked the land like any other farmer or cattleman. But then he started noticing signs. Holes appearing overnight, cattle avoiding certain spots, dirt that seemed to shift under footsteps without breaking the surface. He tried to ignore it, but the land didn't let him. He told her about nights when he heard deep sounds beneath the barn floor, like something dragging itself slowly through tunnels. He said there were mornings when he found small patches of earth lifted, almost as if something had surfaced briefly and gone back down. Nothing had ever come out fully, at least not while he was watching, but whatever lived under the ranch had been there long before him. She listened closely, her heart still racing from what she had felt. She knew frontier land had its dangers, but she never imagined anything like this. The rancher didn't speak like a man telling a tale to scare her. His voice held the weight of someone who had spent many nights trying to understand what he could not see. He explained that the creature moved mostly at dusk and dawn, avoiding bright daylight. He believed it navigated through a network of old underground channels. Some days it stayed far from the house. Other days, like today, it drifted close. He said it usually sensed people and avoided them, but recently that had changed. It came closer, almost curious, almost aware. She tried to ask why today felt different, why it came right beneath the bench where she sat. He paused, looking at the ground again. His silence felt heavier than the wind that swept across the ranch. Finally, he said the creature had been getting bolder since the last storm. The heavy rain had flooded some of its deeper paths, forcing it to travel near the surface. It had grown restless, maybe even desperate. He told her this wasn't just about the land. This was about survival for whatever lived beneath it. She asked him if he ever tried to get rid of it or trap it. He shook his head firmly. No, he said. This land was its home long before any of us built fences. His words sank into her unsettlingly. She realized the rancher saw the creature not as an enemy, but as something that existed beside him, something he respected in a strange way. The frontier forced people to live with things they could not fully control. He had simply learned how to coexist with what the old land hid beneath. The wind picked up, brushing against her hair as the last orange light vanished behind the hills. The rancher tightened the lantern hanging by the door, lighting it with a careful strike. The warm glow pushed back the darkness, at least near the porch, but the rest of the ranch fell into shadows. That made everything seem deeper and older. He said they would have to check the barn before turning in. She, shaky but determined, followed him to understand more. The night felt stretched, every sound sharper. The grass whispered, the barn wood groaned, and the earth occasionally shifted far below, reminding her the creature had not gone far when they reached the barn. The rancher showed her places where the soil had been disturbed. He knelt beside the marks, running his hand over the ground with the same calm he used before. He explained how he could tell when it had moved recently, how the land changed subtly in ways most people overlooked. She realized then that the rancher had lived with this mystery so long it had become part of his daily life. But she also sensed something unspoken, something he hadn't shared yet. A reason he lived alone. A reason he needed help. A reason he asked her to stay seated earlier instead of running. As they turned back toward the house, a deep sound echoed beneath the barn floor. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakably alive. She froze. The rancher held up a hand, signaling stillness. The sound grew softer, like the creature was shifting deeper underground again. He whispered to her that it was moving toward one of the older tunnels, the ones closer to the house. She felt the fear tighten around her chest again, but mixed with something else, curiosity, a strange pull she didn't understand. As they neared the porch, she finally asked him the question that had been building all evening. If the creature had grown bolder, what did he think it wanted now? He didn't answer. He looked toward the fields where the night stretched endlessly, then back at the house. "It's not the ranch it's after," he said quietly. She stared at him, confusion mixing with fear. He met her eyes. "It came close because of you." And before she could ask what he meant, the ground behind them shook with a deep, rising thud. As if something massive had surfaced nearer than ever before, the ground behind them shuddered, hard enough to rattle the lantern against the porch post. She stumbled forward, grabbing the rail as dust shook loose from the roof boards. The rancher turned slowly, his face set, his hand hovering near the lantern hook as if he expected the light to drop. Somewhere beneath the earth, deep but not as deep as before, something shifted in a slow, heavy roll. It did not sound like thunder. It sounded like weight. It sounded like something changing its place in the dark. Her first thought was to run, but where could she go? The ranch was surrounded by open land on every side, miles of prairie and low hills. There was nowhere safer than the house, and even that suddenly felt thin above whatever lived under the ground. Her second thought was louder than the first. Why her? Why had the rancher said it came closer because of her? She turned toward him, trying to find an answer in his eyes, but he was staring out toward the far fence line, jaw clenched. He told her to get inside. His voice was calm but firm, leaving no space for argument. She hesitated, wanting to ask more questions, but another faint tremor under her boots cut her words short. She pushed open the door and stepped into the house, the lantern light spreading soft over the wooden floor. The walls felt close and safe, yet she could not shake the sense that whatever moved under the ranch did not care about walls or doors. It moved through earth, not air, and the floor beneath her was only a thin layer between them. The rancher followed her in, closing the door as gently as if he did not want the sound to carry. He checked the windows, then crossed to the shelf where he kept a small box. From inside he pulled out folded papers, edges worn and yellowed. She watched him place them on the table and smooth them out. They looked like old property maps, marked with faded lines, circles, and notes. He pointed at one long line that curved under the sketch of the house. That, he said, was where the main underground tunnel ran. The creature had been following that path for years, long before he arrived. It was part of the land. She leaned closer. Across the map were other marks, smaller circles drawn near the stream, near the barn, and near the row of stones behind the house. Some of the marks were crossed out, Others were darker, traced over and over. She asked him what they meant. He said the darker circles were the places where the ground had opened up in the past. Not wide, he added quickly, seeing her face, but enough to show that something large had risen close to the surface before drifting down again. He told her that people who had lived here before him kept records like this. Some called it superstition. Others called it protection. She asked him again why he thought it came near her. This time he did not turn away. He studied her face carefully, as if searching for something he could not explain. Then he asked about her past, but not in the ordinary way. He did not ask about family or work first. He asked if she had ever felt the ground move before in other towns or fields. Had she ever heard a deep sound under her feet with no thunder in the sky? The question surprised her. She thought back. She remembered long nights as a child when she lay awake, feeling the bed tremble slightly on stormless nights. She remembered a moment in a small town where the water trough rippled even though the air was still. She had brushed those memories aside for years, blaming them on her own fear or imagination. When she told him that, he grew even more serious. He said the land on this side of the frontier was old in ways people did not always understand. Some people grew up never feeling anything strange under their feet. Others seemed to carry a pull with them that the land noticed. He believed the creature under the ranch had sensed her the moment she arrived. Not because she was in danger, but because she was different in a way the land recognized. He did not say how he knew that, but his certainty settled in the room like another weight. She did not like the idea of being noticed by something that never showed its full shape. She had come to the ranch to escape past troubles, not to step into new ones. Still, she could not deny what she had felt on that bench or what she had heard beneath the barn. The rancher told her there were stories. Old cowhands and frontier families talked about something vast that roamed below certain plains, moving slow, shaping subtle ridges on the surface. Some claimed it guarded something. Others claimed it hunted sound or feeling rather than flesh. Nobody really knew. Most people left before they found out. The first subplot in that quiet room was her own past. She had left the last town after a string of misfortunes. A false promise of marriage, whispers that followed her into every store, a landlord who hinted he knew too much and offered deals she refused. She took the hard road out, riding worn wagons and trading what little she had in hopes of starting fresh. She never imagined that the clean air of the frontier would bring her into contact with something older than any rumor. She had thought her worst struggle would be against loneliness or poverty, not against the land that seemed to look back at her. The second layer of conflict was the rancher himself. She could tell he was hiding something more than fear of the creature. His eyes carried a tiredness that did not come from lack of sleep. In the small moments when he thought she was not looking, he glanced toward the far bedroom door. He lived alone, but sometimes his gaze settled there with a kind of quiet guilt. When she asked if he had family, he said they were gone. Not with the quick, sharp tone of fresh grief, but with the heavy calm of a man who carried older wounds. She wondered then if the tunnels beneath the ranch had something to do with that loss. Later that night, when the tremors faded and the house grew still, he told her more. Years ago, he had not lived here alone. A woman and a small boy shared the ranch with him. They had built new fences, laughed in the yard, grown used to the gentle shudder of the earth the way some people grew used to train tracks near a town. At first, the creature stayed far. Then the tunnels shifted nearer. One season, after a stretch of heavy rain, the boy disappeared near the stone row behind the house. They searched for days. No sign, no struggle, just a patch of disturbed soil and a slow, low sound beneath the ground that would not stop for hours. He never said the creature took the child. He only said nothing else could have moved that much earth without leaving tracks. After that, the woman could not bear the land anymore. She left with a wagon, heading east, and never came back. He stayed. Not because he wanted to, but because leaving felt like abandoning something he was meant to watch. The ranch had become less a home and more a post, a place he guarded because no one else would. Hearing that made her chest ache. She began to see the rancher not only as a quiet man of the land, but as someone who chose responsibility over escape. His calm was not natural. It was practiced. It was the only way he knew to stand between an unseen force and anyone else who might wander into its reach. Now she had wandered in, carrying a strange pull. The creature seemed to feel, outside. Night wrapped the ranch in thick darkness. The cattle had gone quiet. The wind moved through the dry grass with a soft, restless hiss. The rancher told her they would have to adapt now that it had focused on her. He believed the creature sensed her presence, not as prey, but as a kind of echo it had been searching for. That scared her more than the idea of teeth or claws. Being wanted by something you could not see was a different kind of fear. They set a routine for the next days. She would help with the cattle by day, staying clear of the marked circles on the map. They would both watch for changes in the ground, in the animals, in the sound of the wind moving over the soil. He said that the creature rarely rose near the surface when the sun was high, but its presence could still be felt in the way the land shifted temperature or how certain spots seemed to hum faintly if you stood still long enough. A new thread started when they went into town for supplies. The small frontier town served as a narrow strip of comfort between wild land and wider danger. As they stepped into the general store, she noticed how people greeted the rancher with brief nods, nothing more. No one asked how he was. No one made small talk. It was as if he carried something they respected from a distance. She heard a whispered comment near the back. Something about the man who stayed on cursed ground. Another voice shushed it quickly. When she walked down the aisle, an older woman from the town studied her quietly. At the counter, the woman leaned in and asked where she was staying. When she named the ranch, the woman's face changed. Not shocked exactly, but cautious. She asked if the rancher had told her everything. She said there were tales that went beyond what maps showed. Talk of the thing under the ranch growing restless whenever someone new arrived. The woman hinted that others before her had come, tried to help, then left quickly after hearing the sounds at night. Not everyone was drawn in? Only a certain kind of person. Someone the land recognized. On the ride back, the wagon wheels rolled over rough ground, and she finally asked the rancher how many others had been there between his family and her. He gave a small number. A hired worker or two. A couple seeking land. None stayed long. None reported the ground shifting quite as strongly as it had since she arrived. He said this without blame, but the words still made her feel as if the ranch had reached out for her in particular. As days passed, the main conflict deepened. The creature beneath the ranch moved more often. Sometimes in the early morning, sometimes just after dusk. At first, it stayed near the tunnels marked on the map. Then the signs spread. Faint ridges in places that had never moved before. Small cracks forming in hard soil. Cattle began circling the house at night instead of sleeping near the outer fields. As if they instinctively moved closer to her, she started waking in the middle of the night with a strange feeling, like a low vibration in her chest that did not match her heartbeat. When she sat up and swung her feet to the floor, the wood under her heels felt warm. Not hot, but not cool either. She would sit there, listening, and beneath the quiet of the house, she could hear a slow, distant sound. Not a roar, not a cry. More like a great, steady breathing buried deep in the land. During one of those nights, she stepped into the front room and found the rancher awake, sitting by the window with his rifle resting across his knees. He did not look surprised to see her. He said he knew it was only a matter of time before she felt the pull more strongly. She asked him if he thought the creature could ever break through fully. He did not answer that question. Instead, he asked her something else. Whether she had ever felt different from others even before she came here. Not in a prideful sense, but in the quiet way of someone who senses things others ignore. She nodded slowly. She had always picked up shifts in the mood of a place. Tiny changes in sound, the way rooms felt before bad news arrived. People had joked that she could smell trouble before it reached the door. Maybe the land had noticed that same trait. Maybe the creature did too. The tension grew in small, constant ways. The ground never tore open. The creature never lunged from the earth. Yet the sense of its awareness grew thicker each day. The ranch was becoming a meeting point. Not yet a battlefield, but no longer an ordinary home. She and the rancher stood at the edge of something neither of them fully understood, one late afternoon. As she led a horse back toward the stable, the earth beneath the animal suddenly dipped. Not a full collapse, just a quick drop like a shallow pocket giving way. The horse jerked, snorted, and yanked back the reins. The dip in the ground shaped itself into a long curve, then smoothed out again, as if something large had slithered just beneath the surface. Brushing close to her boots, she stared at the fading mark, heart racing. The rancher ran toward her from across the yard, breath short, eyes fixed on the ground at her feet. He did not look surprised. He looked resigned, like a man who feared this exact moment, and knew what it meant. He whispered that the creature was no longer just passing under the ranch. It was following her steps. The shallow curve in the dirt remained, only for a moment before settling smooth again, but the image stayed with her long after the ground stilled. It felt like the ranch itself had blinked at her, opening a single eye beneath the soil before closing it again. The horse trembled beside her, hooves scraping in the dirt, its breath sharp and panicked. The rancher rushed to her side, gripping the reins firmly to calm the animal. He didn't ask if she was hurt. He didn't ask what she saw. His expression told her he already knew. The creature had drawn near on purpose. It was choosing its path now, and its path followed her. They led the horse into the barn and shut the doors behind them. The air inside felt tight, thick with the smell of hay and old wood. The rancher leaned against the stall door for a long moment, letting the silence settle between them. She waited for him to speak, hoping he would tell her something that made sense of the fear crawling beneath her skin. But he only said they needed to watch the land more closely now, that the creature's behavior was shifting. She sensed the words he did not say. The shift was because of her. The following days stretched with a strange tension, each hour feeling like a held breath. The ranch, once quiet in a lonely but peaceful way, now felt alive with movement beneath its surface. The earth carried faint tremors each morning, not enough to shake dishes or rattle windows, but enough to feel in her bones when she stood still. The cattle behaved strangely, grouping in tighter circles, refusing to wander far even during sunny hours. They lifted their heads often, as if listening for something. At night, the house felt less like shelter and more like a watchtower. The rancher kept lanterns burning longer, pacing between windows, scanning the darkness for signs of disturbed earth. She found herself waking almost every night, drawn out of sleep by the faint hum beneath the floorboards. It was never loud, never violent, but steady enough to feel like breathing. She lay awake most nights, listening, wondering how something so massive could move without breaking through the surface. Their connection with the nearby town deepened in a different way too. People whispered more when they arrived for supplies. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with quiet concern. One ranch hand from a neighboring spread mentioned seeing dust rise at strange hours near the rancher's land. Another said he heard low sounds while riding past at dawn. The older woman from the store pulled her aside once and said softly that some places were not meant for everyone, and some people were not meant for certain kinds of land. The woman's eyes lingered on her with a meaning she couldn't understand fully but could feel deeply. One evening, as the last bit of sunlight clung to the sky, the rancher took her behind the house. There was a line of old stones there, half buried in the dirt, covered in moss and dust. He told her those stones marked the oldest part of the ranch. Families before him believed the ground beneath that place was sacred. Not blessed, not cursed, just old in a way few people could respect. He touched one of the stones and said the air always felt heavier near them, as if the land remembered everything that had happened over the generations. She knelt beside one, brushing dirt from its surface. For a moment the stone felt warm, not from sunlight but from something inside the earth. She pulled her hand back in surprise, looking to him for an explanation. He said quietly that the creature passed under that spot often, that it might be drawn to the stones for reasons nobody fully understood. Some believed the stones marked an opening to deeper tunnels. Others believed they marked where the creature once surfaced long ago. A new mystery unfolded when she discovered the rancher carving small wooden markers in the evenings. They looked like simple pieces of wood, but each had quiet lines carved into it, marks that connected like a map. She watched him carve them with care, whispering faint thoughts under his breath as he worked. When she finally asked what they were for, he told her they were protective markers, something his family used in the past when dealing with land they didn't fully understand. He didn't say they would stop the creature. He only said they would let the land know they meant no harm. She placed one of the markers near the barn door, another near the porch steps. She felt silly at first, like she was playing into superstition, but that feeling faded quickly. As soon as the marker touched the soil, the ground beneath her feet pulsed faintly, like a slow heartbeat responding. The rancher noticed it too, though he said nothing. They stood together in the gathering dusk, watching the horizon darken, listening to the land beneath shift in a long, low roll. Later that night, a storm gathered over the prairie, clouds building in thick layers, wind rising sharp across the fields. Rain fell in sudden sheets, pounding the roof and turning the yard to mud. The rancher stayed awake by the window, lantern casting his shadow across the floor. She sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket, feeling the storm rattle the walls. The thunder masked the sound of the creature at first, but midway through the night a deeper vibration rose beneath the floorboards. It carried through the storm, steady and strong, almost like it was calling out. The rancher stood, crossing the room with slow steps. He said the storm would push the creature closer to the surface. Flooded tunnels forced it upward, making it more active. She looked at him, fear rising again, asking if it could break through the ground. He shook his head but did not speak with full confidence. He said only that the creature had never tried to break through before, but everything about its movements lately was different. As the storm raged, they felt a sudden pressure under the house, a lift so slight that it barely tilted the lantern on the table. She stared at the floor, breath stuck in her throat. The rancher stepped back, motioning her away from the center of the room. The pressure grew, then eased, like something massive was passing just beneath the foundation. The storm thundered overhead as the ground breathed below, trapping them between two forces of nature. When the storm finally eased, a heavy silence filled the house. Outside, the night was thick with the scent of wet earth. They stepped onto the porch to look around. The sky was silver with leftover clouds, the ground soaked and dark. The cattle huddled near the barn, restless and uneasy. Small ridges of freshly shifted soil stretched across the yard like long, thin scars. She followed one ridge with her eyes and froze. It led straight toward the stone row behind the house. Before she could speak, the rancher touched her shoulder. He said they needed to check the stones before daylight. Something in his tone told her he feared what they might find. They moved slowly across the yard, lantern held between them. The grass squished under their boots, and the ground felt softer than usual, almost spongy. When they reached the stones, the lantern light revealed something new. The largest stone had shifted from its place, leaning slightly forward as if pushed from beneath. The earth around it was raised in a gentle curve, breathing outward. She knelt and placed her palm against the soil. It was warm, not from the storm, warm from movement below. The rancher crouched beside her, pressing his hand to the same spot. His breath caught in his throat. The creature was directly beneath the stones. They both stood quickly, stepping back as the ground gave a small heave. Not enough to break open, but enough to show the creature was rising closer than ever before. The rancher gripped her arm gently and whispered that this was the closest it had ever come. She felt her heartbeat pounding in her ears, fear and curiosity twisting together as they backed away. Something happened that raised the tension even further. The ground pulsed again, and this time her name seemed to stir in her mind. Not spoken aloud, but felt deep inside, like the creature touched a hidden string within her. She stumbled. The rancher caught her, eyes widening when she told him what she felt. He didn't doubt her. He looked toward the stones with a new understanding, a deeper fear mixed with something else. He told her the creature wasn't just aware of her anymore, it was calling to her, and before she could ask why, the ground behind. The stones rose in a slow, massive swell, as if something huge pressed upward, preparing to break through. The ground behind the stones swelled in a slow rise, pushing the wet earth upward until it looked like a great mound breathing under the lantern light. She felt the air thicken, not from danger but from something deep and ancient that had finally reached the surface after years of silence. Her heartbeat pounded in her chest as the rancher stepped closer, placing himself between her and the rising earth. His hand lifted slightly, not to draw a weapon, but as if to steady the moment, as if to tell whatever lived beneath that they meant no harm. A swell in the ground stopped. It held there, tall and round like the back of something massive resting just beneath the soil. She could feel a pull inside her chest again, warm and steady, like a distant hum rising inside her. It wasn't fear this time, but recognition. She realized the creature wasn't calling for her to come closer. It was waiting for her to stay still and simply listen. The rancher sensed the shift in her posture and watched her carefully, ready to step in if she faltered. But she didn't feel weak or threatened. She felt strangely grounded, as if she finally understood why the creature had been drawn to her from the moment she arrived. She stepped forward, though her feet trembled. The rancher put a hand on her arm, asking softly if she was sure. She nodded. The earth beneath the stones trembled lightly, like a slow heartbeat responding to hers. The mound lowered just a little, settling with a quiet sigh, and she felt a strange peace wash over her. It was as if the creature was showing itself without, rising fully, like it understood the boundary between its world and theirs. She crouched near the warm soil, pressing her palm gently to the earth. The warmth spread through her hand, moving up her arm and settling in her chest. She kept her voice low as she told the creature she meant no harm, that she understood it wasn't hunting or threatening them. She spoke the words slowly, unsure if it could understand, but trusting something deeper than language. The rancher stood behind her, silent but steady, allowing the moment to unfold. The ground pulsed once beneath her hand, a steady, gentle movement like a response. The fear that had followed her since the first tremor lifted from her shoulders. She finally understood that the creature hadn't come near her because she was in danger. It came near because it recognized something in her presence that made the land feel less threatened. Instead of chasing her as prey, it had followed her steps to understand her. It sought connection, not conflict. The mound lowered a little more. The ground smoothed at the edges, and the warmth under her palm cooled gently, as if the creature was retreating again. She felt the pull fade from her chest. Whatever connection had formed between them had reached its purpose. The rancher exhaled deeply, relief softening the lines in his face. He told her the creature must have sensed her honesty, her calm, her willingness to face it instead of running. The land respected that. Creatures older than the ranch respected that too. As the last vibration faded, the mound slowly sank back into the earth until the ground lay flat again, soft from the storm, but no longer swollen. The stones settled in their places, no longer tilted. The silence that followed was not the heavy tension of before. It was peaceful, like the sigh of a long-held breath being released at last. They returned to the house as the first hint of dawn touched the sky. The early light stretched across the ranch, washing the wet ground in soft color. The cattle moved calmly again, grazing without fear. The birds returned to the fence posts, chirping as if nothing unusual had happened. Even the barn looked steadier, its old wood glowing gold in the morning sun. The rancher stood beside her, on the porch, watching the land with a quiet expression she hadn't seen on him before. Peace, real peace. A peace he hadn't known for years. He told her that the creature would not trouble them again. It had reached the surface to understand her presence, and now that it had, it would return to its deeper tunnels. It would move far beneath the ranch, content to carry its old rhythm without harming the world above. She asked him if it would ever come back. He smiled a little and said that if it ever did, he trusted that she would know how to calm it better than he ever could. Over the next days, the ranch settled into a steady routine. The tremors disappeared. The cattle wandered freely. The soil near the stones stayed still and cool. She found herself breathing easier, no longer waking in the night with a sense of someone watching from beneath. Instead, she felt a quiet bond with the land. As if the old earth had accepted her as part of its long story, she began helping the rancher more. learning the patterns of the days, the way the light moved across the fields, the way the cattle responded to small sounds. She found comfort in the simple work, in the warm mornings and cool nights. The rancher, once reserved, began sharing stories from before the loss of his family. He spoke softly of the boy who loved the horses, of the woman who kept the house warm with laughter. She listened with care, offering kindness without pressing him to share more than he wished. One afternoon, while repairing a fence post together, he told her something he had never spoken aloud. He said he believed the creature did not take his child. The tremors at the time had swallowed any tracks, but he had spent years blaming the wrong force. Now that he understood the creature better, he realized it never meant harm. The land had shifted in ways he misinterpreted. Grief had built stories where truth was missing. She touched his shoulder gently, telling him it wasn't his fault. He nodded, a soft acceptance settling in his eyes. A quiet friendship grew between them, strong and comfortable. They worked side by side, shared meals, and repaired what the ranch needed. Sometimes in the evenings they walked near the stone row, feet brushing against soft earth that now felt steady under each step. She could still sense a faint warmth sometimes, not from danger but from memory, like the land acknowledged her presence with a gentle nod. The town noticed the change too. When they arrived for supplies, people greeted the rancher with warmer eyes, the whispers fading. The older woman from the store smiled at her and said softly that some people were meant to heal the places others feared. That sentence stayed with her, settling deep like a seed rooting into the soil. Seasons shifted. Grass grew tall in the fields. Sunsets stretched wide across the horizon. Life on the ranch became more than work. It became home. She found joy in the small moments, in the quiet mornings when the sky glowed soft pink, in the laughter she hadn't felt in years, in the steady companionship of the rancher, who now walked lighter than before. The land itself felt kinder, the way a place softens when the struggle finally ends. One evening, as they watched the sun dip behind the hills, the rancher thanked her. He said she had saved the ranch not by fighting anything, but by listening. She shook her head and said she had only followed what felt right. He smiled and said that sometimes, in the old American frontier, that was the strongest kind of courage someone could show, the courage to face the unknown with understanding instead of fear. When night settled, they walked back to the porch. The air was warm, the earth steady. In the distance, the cattle moved slowly under the fading light. She felt the land breathe in a way she had never noticed before, calm and balanced, as if both worlds above and below had finally reached peace. The creature never rose near the surface again. But sometimes, on quiet nights, a soft tremor hummed far below, gentle and slow, like a greeting from the deep tunnels. Not a warning, not a threat, just a reminder that the old land carried stories older than fences and houses, and that she was now part of one of them. She stood on the porch with the rancher beside her, watching the horizon glow under the stars. The ranch was safe. The land was calm. And for the first time in a long while, she felt her heart settle into a place that felt like it had been waiting for her all along. The frontier had tested her, but it had also welcomed her. It had shown her danger, mystery, and courage. It had shown her connection where she least expected it. And in the end, it had given her something she thought she had lost forever, a place to belong, and a quiet, steady hope that stretched as wide as the old American plains.